You know the exact sound of the ceiling fan in your bedroom when your body just refused to do what you wanted it to do and the room goes completely quiet. You are lying there staring at the ceiling and the woman next to you shifts her weight, trying to pretend it does not matter. And you clear your throat and you say something about how long the week was. You mention the stress at the office. You say your mind was just somewhere else, or you had too much coffee, or you are just exhausted. You say whatever you have to say to fill that terrible, heavy silence. But underneath that excuse, there is a cold, sinking feeling in your gut. You are lying there wondering if this is it. You are wondering if this is the moment where you finally cross the line from being a man who can perform on demand to a man who just talks about the past. A lot of men are not broken. They are just ignoring the wrong things. I remember that ceiling fan. I remember the weight of those excuses. For a long time in my early 50s, I lived in that specific kind of quiet desperation. I was still traveling out of Phoenix constantly. I was closing contracts, managing a regional sales team, running on adrenaline, airport coffee, and the belief that my body was just a vehicle that would do whatever I commanded it to do. In your 30s and 40s, you can get away with that. You can treat your body like a rental car. You drive it hard, you put cheap fuel in it, you ignore the warning lights on the dashboard, and it still starts up the next morning. But then you hit 50, and the rules of the contract change. I did not want to admit the rules had changed. I was proud. I was used to being the guy who had the answers, the guy who could push through a wall if he had to. When the physical responses started slowing down, when the morning predictability vanished, when my energy began crashing at 3 in the afternoon, I did not look at my habits. I just pushed harder. I drank more caffeine. I slept less. I tried to force the engine to run on sheer willpower, and that is exactly how you ruin an engine. The physical failure was hard, but the distance it created was worse. When your body stops responding the way you expect it to, especially in the bedroom, you do not just lose a physical function, you lose your footing. You start avoiding your partner. You start going to bed a little later, finding an excuse to stay up answering emails, just to ensure she is already asleep when you walk in. You avoid the physical proximity because you want to avoid the possibility of failing again. My first marriage was already under strain from the travel and the work, but I know now that the silence I brought into the house, the absolute refusal to look my wife in the eye and say I was struggling physically, helped tear down whatever was left of the foundation. I was so afraid of looking weak that I became completely absent. What I did not understand back then, what took me years of reading and rebuilding to figure out, is that vitality is not about desire. It is not about how much of a man you feel like in your head. It is a mechanical issue. It is a plumbing issue. If you have more than 50 miles on the odometer, circulation matters more than pride. Think about the infrastructure of a house in a place with hard water. Over the years, the pipes start to accumulate calcium. They build up scale on the inside. The diameter of the pipe gets narrower and narrower. At first, you do not notice it. The water still comes out of the faucet, but eventually the pressure drops. The flow weakens. You can turn the handle all the way. You can want the water to come rushing out. But if the lines are restricted, the flow simply cannot happen. The male body is a hydraulic system. It operates on pressure and flow. When the brain sends a signal, the vessels need to expand. They need to relax and open up so the blood can rush in and create the physical response. That expansion depends on a specific gas called nitric oxide. When you are young, your inner vessel walls produce it easily. The pipes are clean. The flow is instant. But as we age, and especially as we live under chronic stress, something else happens. Our bodies become acidic. I spent decades running on the stress hormone cortisol. I was living on tight deadlines and high stakes. When your body is constantly in a state of stress, your system creates acidic byproducts. Your diet, if it is anything like the standard American diet I was eating on the road, dumps more acid into the system. When your blood environment leans acidic, the lining of your blood vessels takes a hit. They become stiff. They lose the ability to produce that nitric oxide. The pipes harden. They cannot expand anymore. So you are lying in bed wanting to perform, but the lines are physically restricted by an environment you created. I stumbled onto the fix for this by complete accident. It was not a doctor who told me this. It was an old memory of my grandfather, combined with a conversation I had with an older guy at a gym in Scottsdale years later. I was dealing with terrible acid reflux at the time. My stomach was a mess from the stress of the divorce and the rebuilding phase of my life. I was taking antacids constantly, and they were barely making a dent. This older guy, a retired contractor who looked like he could still carry a bundle of shingles up a ladder, saw me chewing on chalky tablets in the locker room. He shook his head and told me I was wasting my money. He said to go to the grocery store, buy a little yellow box of baking soda for $1, and drink a little bit of it in water every morning. He said it is what the old-timers did to keep the engine clean. I was desperate enough to try it. The next morning, I put a small amount of sodium bicarbonate, plain baking soda, into a glass of water. I drank it down. It tasted like ocean water, but within 20 minutes, the fire in my chest was gone. I kept doing it because it fixed my stomach. But about 3 weeks into this daily routine, I noticed something else. Something completely unexpected. I woke up one morning, and the old predictability was back. The physical response that I had not seen reliably in 4 years was just there. Strong. Undeniable. I did not understand it at first. I thought it was a fluke. I thought maybe I just slept better, but it stayed. The energy in the afternoon stayed level. The coldness I used to feel in my hands and feet during the day was gone. When I went for my evening walks or did my resistance work, I was not gassing out halfway through. The engine was getting oxygen again. I started looking into what baking soda actually does in the human body. I stopped reading sales reports for a few weeks and started reading about physiology. I needed to understand what was happening to me. What I discovered was elegantly simple. Sodium bicarbonate is highly alkaline. When you introduce it into a system that is running hot and acidic from stress, poor sleep, and aging, it acts like a buffer. It neutralizes the excess acid in the blood. When the acidity drops, the environment inside your blood vessels changes. The lining of those vessels, the endothelium, suddenly does not have to fight through a toxic environment. It relaxes. And when it relaxes, it starts producing nitric oxide again. The stiff pipes become flexible. The pathways open up. By simply changing the pH balance of my blood with something I bought in the baking aisle for $1, I had inadvertently opened up the hydraulic lines of my entire body. The blood was flowing back into the tissues that had been starved for it. I remember sitting on my patio looking out at the McDowell Mountains, holding that cheap cardboard box, feeling a mixture of profound relief and quiet anger. I had spent years thinking I was losing my manhood. I had let shame eat away at my confidence. I had put walls up around myself. And the core mechanical issue was just restricted lines caused by an acidic environment. The confidence comes back when the body starts to respond again. When I met Alyssa a few years later, my life was different. She is 9 years younger than me, a former interior design consultant, and she has a way of looking right through the noise and demanding honesty. In the past, if my body had faltered, I would have panicked and shut down. But because I understood my machinery now, because I had seen it come back online, the fear was gone. There was a night early in our marriage where things just did not line up. I was exhausted from a massive negotiation. Instead of rolling over and staring at the ceiling fan in shame, I looked right at her. I told her my lines were running a little low on pressure tonight and I just needed to sleep. I did not apologize for being a man in my late 50s. I just stated the reality of the machinery. She smiled, put her hand on my chest, and we went to sleep. The next morning, the engine fired up perfectly. You cannot have that kind of quiet confidence if you think you are fundamentally broken. You can only have it when you know you are just managing a complex system. Here is exactly what I did and what I still do every single morning. I wake up early. Before I touch coffee, before I look at a screen, I go to the kitchen. I take 1/4 teaspoon of pure baking soda. Not baking powder, baking soda. I drop it into 8 ounces of room temperature water. I stir it until it dissolves completely, and I drink it down on an empty stomach. Look, it is not more complicated than that. Simple as that. I do not use a heaping spoon. I do not do it multiple times a day. More is not better here. If you dump too much alkalinity into your stomach, you will mess up your digestion. You need just enough to act as a gentle buffer for the system. A 1/4 teaspoon is enough to change the systemic environment without shutting down your stomach acid entirely. I wait about 30 minutes before I have my coffee or eat anything. I let the system absorb it. I let it enter the bloodstream and do the quiet work of neutralizing the acidic waste that built up overnight. I was talking to my son Ethan recently. He is 31, grinding it out in commercial real estate, living on the same kind of adrenaline I used to run on. I told him not to wait until the wheels fall off to understand his own plumbing. I told him that right now, his body is compensating for all the stress he is putting it through, but eventually, the bill comes due. The pipes will harden if he does not manage the internal environment. There is a maintenance protocol you have to respect if you want to keep playing the game. I need to be clear about something. If you have severe high blood pressure and your doctor has told you to strictly avoid sodium, you need to listen to your own engine and your own mechanics. Baking soda is sodium bicarbonate. It has sodium. For me, the vasodilation, the opening of the blood vessels, actually lowered my overall resting pressure because the heart did not have to pump so hard against stiff pipes. But your system is your system. You have to be smart about what you put into it. What I want you to take away from this is not just a recipe for a morning drink. What I want you to understand is the principle behind it. You are not uniquely defective. If you are struggling with vitality, if you are struggling with that physical response, you are likely just dealing with restricted flow. You are dealing with a system that has been running too hard, too hot, and too acidic for too many years. You do not need to sit in the dark and feel ashamed of that. You need to do the maintenance. You need to clear the lines. When you start managing the internal environment of your body, when you take away the acidic friction, the body knows exactly what to do. It wants to heal. It wants to flow. The mechanisms you think you lost are usually still there, just waiting for the pathways to open up. I am 63 years old. I do not have the body of a 30-year-old, and I do not want one. But my engine runs clean. My lines are clear. I wake up with energy, I show up for my wife without anxiety, and I trust my machinery to do what it is supposed to do. The flow is everything. Once you get the flow back, the rest of the man comes back with it. We are going to keep talking about this. There is a lot more to unpack about how we keep this machinery running on the back half of the journey. Keep showing up. Keep paying attention to the dashboard. I will see you in the next one.